He was left to die in a crate under a white-hot Arizona sun. A German shepherd puppy, limp, his breathing shallow. He was never meant to be found again. Nearby, a different kind of prisoner, a former Marine haunted by war, was just as lost. He was trapped in his own invisible cage of memory. No one saw the man stop. No one believed he could save anyone, least of all himself. But he saw the puppy's defiance, and he remembered what it meant to be a fighter. What happened next will make you cry and believe in second chances, even for those who were forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that no soul, human or animal, should be left behind to die alone, hit that subscribe button, because this story, this one, might just restore your faith in miracles. The heat outside Tucson wasn't just weather. It was a physical weight, an anvil pressing down on the asphalt of the highway. The air shimmered above the road, distorting the horizon into a watery illusion. It was high noon in the Sonoran Desert, a time when only the desperate or the damned were moving. Marcus Rourke was a bit of both. He drove his old Ford pickup, a machine as scarred and anonymous as he tried to be, its engine a low growl against the immense silence. The truck's air conditioning had died years ago, but Marcus barely noticed. The dry 110-degree furnace blasting through the open window felt familiar, almost purifying. It burned away everything but the essentials. He kept his gaze moving, a restless, sweeping scan of the roadside, the median, the far-off ridges. It was a habit seared into his nerves from another life, another desert, one where the shoulder of the road hid bombs instead of just sand and creosote. Marcus was a man built of dense muscle gone slightly slack, hidden under a worn flannel shirt despite the heat. He was nearing 40, but looked older, his face obscured by a thick, unkempt beard and framed by hair that was more salt than pepper. His eyes, deep set and pale blue, were the only part of him that seemed truly alive, and they were exhausted. He was a former Marine sergeant, a man who had been praised for his hardness, for his ability to withstand pressure. Now that pressure was internal. It had pushed him out of his life, away from his family, and into this rattling metal box on a highway to nowhere. He lived in a small, crumbling rental house on the city's forgotten edge, a place with cracked plaster and a yard of dead weeds. It suited him. It demanded nothing. He needed gas. The needle was kissing E. He pulled off the highway into a sun-bleached station that looked like a relic from a forgotten era. Only one pump worked. As he filled the tank, the smell of gasoline cut sharply through the dust. And for a second, he wasn't in Tucson. He was back in the convoy. The smell of diesel and something metallic, something burning. He shut his eyes, his left hand gripping the pump handle so hard his knuckles turned white. "Just get gas," he muttered, the words a rough scrape in his throat. He went inside to pay, the chime of the door jarring him. The air inside was thick and cool, smelling faintly of stale coffee and cleaning chemicals. Behind the counter stood a woman. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, impossibly thin, with hair the color of straw pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was a map of fine lines, but her eyes were sharp and clear, like polished bluestones. Her name tag read Lena. She looked at Marcus, not with the fear or pity he usually saw, but with a simple, weary assessment. Weary assessment. "Hot enough for you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Marcus just grunted, placing a $20 bill on the counter. He avoided eye contact, focusing on a rack of expired potato chips. "Adjust the gas." Lena took the money, her fingers quick. "Drive safe," she said as he took his change. A lot of folks breaking down in this heat. A lot of things get left behind. Marcus paused at the door, the bell jingling impatiently. He glanced back. "Yeah," he said, the single word costing him something. "You do." He pushed back out into the furnace, the interaction leaving him vaguely unsettled. Lena was a survivor. He recognized. She had the look of someone who had seen the bottom and hadn't blinked. He, on the other hand, felt like he was still falling. He got back on the highway, the truck shuddering as it hit cruising speed. The engine's drone was his only companion. It was on the long, empty stretch heading west of the city, where the cigars stood like silent sentinels, that his trained eyes caught the anomaly. It wasn't a threat. It was just wrong. A dark shape on the shimmering shoulder. Maybe 100 yards ahead. Not a blowout tire. Not a bundle of rags. It had structure. He slowed the truck, his instincts overriding his apathy. He pulled onto the gravel, the truck's tires crunching loudly. He sat for a full minute just watching. It was a wire crate, small like one for a cat or a small dog. And it wasn't empty. He got out of the truck, the door groaning in protest. The heat slapped him in the face. He walked slowly, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust. Flies buzzed in the dead air. As he got closer, he saw it. Inside the crate, curled on the hot wire bottom with no blanket, no bowl, was a German Shepherd puppy. It couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Its black and tan fur was matted with filth and feces. It was lying limp, its small chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid pants. Its pink tongue, dotted with white foam, lolled from the side of its mouth. It was dying. It wasn't crying or whining. It was just waiting. Its body surrendered to the heat. Marcus stared, his face an impassive mask. Someone had done this, driven out here and left it. It was a death sentence, slow and deliberate. The sight of the abandoned creature locked in its cage, helpless, punched a hole straight through his carefully constructed numbness. It triggered something cold and familiar. He was suddenly back in his brother's pristine dining room in San Diego 6 months ago. The Last Supper, he called it. His brother Mark, a man who had built a life of soft hands and easy opinions, had looked at him across the polished mahogany table. And Marcus, with his perfect wife and his 401k, had finally said what they all felt. "We just can't do this anymore, Marcus," Mark had said, his voice laced with the irritation of a man inconvenienced. "It's a burden. We're all just tired of waiting for the next explosion." Marcus had looked at his father, a man who had been a Marine himself, a man Marcus had once worshipped. His father just stared at his plate, tracing the pattern with his fork, his silence a deafening confirmation. A burden. Left behind. A large semi-truck roared past Marcus on the highway, its horn blaring, the ground vibrating. The sound wave hit him like a physical blow. Suddenly, the smell of diesel and hot asphalt was the smell of the convoy. The dust was thick, choking. He could hear shouting, the high-pitched thwack of rounds hitting metal. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hand instinctively moving to where his rifle should have been. No, he whispered. He forced his eyes open. Tucson. The highway. The crate. He was shaking. The puppy hadn't moved. It was a problem. It was a complication. It was something that required feeling. And feeling was a luxury he couldn't afford. Feeling was weakness. It was the gap in the armor. "And not my problem," he said aloud, his voice harsh. "And not my fight." He turned his back on the crate. He walked back to the truck, each step heavy. He climbed in, slammed the door, and cranked the engine. He didn't look back. He put the truck in gear and hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, spitting gravel. He accelerated, pushing the engine, needing the noise to drown out the silence from the crate. He left it behind, a small, dark square in a cloud of his own dust. He drove for a mile, then another. He gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Not my problem," he repeated, but he couldn't stop his eyes from flicking to the rear-view mirror. He couldn't see the crate anymore. It was gone, but he could still see the image of it. And in that image, just before he had turned away, the puppy had lifted its head just an inch. Its eyes, dull and glazed with heat, had met his. They were dark, hollow, and void of hope. They were just waiting. He kept driving, but the image was burned onto his retinas. Those eyes, he couldn't shake them. The drive back to his rental was a blur of shimmering asphalt and blinding sun. Marcus drove mechanically, his hands locked on the wheel, but his mind was fixed on the image in the rearview mirror. Those eyes, dark, hollow, and waiting. They were superimposed over everything. He saw them in the glare reflecting off the windshield, in the deep shadows of the passing cigarros, in the dark spots of oil staining his driveway as he finally pulled up to the small, sun-baked house. The place was silent. It always was. He got out, the truck door slamming with a hollow metallic thud that echoed in the empty yard. Inside, the air was stale and hot. He hadn't bothered to fix the cheap swamp cooler, preferring the dry heat. It felt like a penance. He threw his keys on the dusty kitchen counter, the sound jarringly loud. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, but it tasted like ash. He sat on the worn couch, staring at the blank television screen, seeing only the crate on the side of the road. He tried to rationalize. Animals died in the desert every day. It was the natural order. It was not his responsibility. He was the last person in the world who should be responsible for anything. He was a burden. He was a burden. He was a bad luck charm. Everything he was assigned to protect, everyone who got close to him, ended up broken. He was toxic. Night fell, but it brought no relief, only a thicker, more oppressive heat. He lay on his bed, the single sheet kicked to the floor. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind was a high-rung wire vibrating with agitation. When sleep finally did pull him under, it was not sleep, but a descent. The nightmares started worse than they had been in months. They were a chaotic collage of his past and present. He was back in the convoy, the air thick with the metallic tang of cordite and burning diesel. The hum of the truck engine outside his house had twisted into the drone of the MA-16. Then the blast, the ringing in his ears. He was looking for his men, shouting their names. But when he looked down at the roadside crater, he didn't see a crater. He saw the wire crate. He was trying to open it, his hands clumsy, the lock jammed. Inside, his father was staring at his plate, refusing to look up. His brother Mark was there, his mouth moving, repeating the word, burden, 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 burden. And inside the crate, the puppy was watching him, its eyes full of a terrible, knowing disappointment. He woke up with a choked gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He was drenched in sweat. The room was pitch black. He was alone. The silence of the house was absolute. The house was absolute. More terrifying than the noise of the... He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, shaking. He couldn't stay here. Before the sun had even begun to hint at its arrival, painting the eastern sky in a faint, bruised purple, he was back in his truck. He told himself he was just going for a drive. He told himself he was just checking, just confirming it was gone or dead so his mind could finally let it go. He was not helping. He was not intervening. He was just closing the loop. The highway was empty at this hour, the air cool and still. He drove faster than he should have, the truck rattling over the dark asphalt. He reached the spot. The air began to shimmer. Marcus sat locked in a silent, agonizing standoff. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. This was a vulnerability. This was an attachment. Attachments were liabilities. Attachments got you killed. Caring was a disease. And he had been fighting for years to stay numb, to stay clean. But he didn't start the engine. He just sat. He watched the patch of dark mud dry out completely. He was trapped, held hostage by a dying animal that was too scared to save itself. And by a flicker of something in his own chest, he thought had died long ago. The sun, which had been a sliver of bruised purple at the start of their standoff, was now a white-hot tyrant in the sky. It was approaching noon. The temperature was already soaring past 105 degrees. The air inside Marcus's truck was an oven. He sat sweating, his flannel shirt plastered to his back, his body rigid. He had not moved for nearly 5 hours. He was a statue of indecision. He had poured water on the ground 3 more times. The puppy had not moved. It was no longer watching him with defiance. It was simply existing. Its shallow pants were the only sign it was still alive, and even those were becoming faint, fluttering breaths. The desert heat was a patient executioner. Marcus's own thirst was a roaring fire in his throat. He had a full canteen in his pack, but he refused to drink. It felt like a betrayal. His discipline, forged in the deserts of Helmand, was now his prison. He could outweigh any man. But he was in a contest with the sun, and the sun was winning. His anger had faded, replaced by a hollow, aching dread. The puppy was going to die right in front of him because he was too much of a coward to care. His apathy was a lie. He knew it now. Apathy didn't make you sit in a 130-degree truck for 5 hours. Apathy didn't make your heart clench every time the puppy's breathing skipped. This was paralysis. He was staring at the crate, lost in this agonizing loop, when his training cut through the heat haze. A sound, wrong. He didn't just hear it. He felt it through the soles of his boots. A high-frequency whine. He scanned his rearview mirror. A large black lifted pickup truck was approaching from the east, coming up on him at an incredible speed. It was one of those aggressively new models, gleaming with chrome, with tires that belonged on a monster truck. It was moving at least 90 miles an hour, a black bullet tearing through the shimmering air. Marcus watched, his senses suddenly razor-sharp, the heat forgotten. The truck wasn't slowing down. It was drifting, moving almost lazily from the center line toward the shoulder, toward him, toward the crate. "Wake up," Marcus hissed, his voice a low growl. He slammed his hand on his own horn, a pathetic, short beat in the vast emptiness. The black truck didn't react. It was still drifting. The driver was probably on their phone, or drunk, or both. In the space of a heartbeat, Marcus calculated the trajectory. The truck was going to hit his parked vehicle. No, it was going to miss him, but it was going to plow directly through the wire crate. The sound, that was what did it. The black truck finally saw him and slammed on its brakes. The high-pitched whine became a full-throated, terrifying screech of tires trying to grip hot asphalt. The truck began to fishtail, a cloud of blue smoke pouring from its rubber. That sound, it was the sound of the wide. The screech of the convoy's brakes, the sudden violent thud of metal hitting an abutment guardrail, the chaos before the blast. Marcus was no longer in Arizona. He was in the kill zone. His paralysis didn't just break. It shattered. He was no longer Marcus Rourke, the broken man. He was Sergeant Rourke, and there was an objective in the open. His body moved without a single conscious thought. He was out of his truck and covering the 10 feet to the crate, before his mind had even registered the decision. He was pure, streamlined instinct. He grabbed the wire crate with both hands. It was scorching hot, searing his palms, but he didn't feel it. He hauled it backward, pulling it out of the direct line of fire. He heard the roar of the diesel engine, a sound like a dragon, right in his ear. He wasn't fast enough. The black truck, sliding sideways in a cloud of its own smoke and panic, sideswiped him. The massive steel bumper didn't hit Marcus. It hit the crate. The force was catastrophic. The crate was ripped from Marcus's grip, the metal handle tearing his skin, and was flung 20 feet down the gravel shoulder. It tumbled end over end, a violent explosion of filth and matted fur before slamming into a cement drainage culvert. The black truck, having regained some control, swerved back onto the highway, and without a moment's hesitation, sped off. It was gone in seconds. Marcus was on the ground, his ears ringing from the noise. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. He pushed himself up, his hands raw, bleeding. Gravel was embedded in his arm. He didn't care. He scrambled, half crawling, half running, to the drainage ditch. The crate was destroyed. It was no longer a cube. It was a mangled, twisted pretzel of wire. The door torn from its hinges, the bottom bent into a V. He expected to see a small, broken body. He expected to see blood. He saw nothing but a crumpled shape in the corner. No. He breathed. He ripped at the bent wire, his hands clumsy, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He tore the metal apart, and then he heard it. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a snarl. It was a high-pitched, terrified, agonizing whimper. A sound of pure, undiluted pain. The sound broke the last of his defenses. It cut straight through the PTSD, the memories, the years of self-imposed isolation. It was the sound of something small and alive that was in agony, and it was his fault. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'm here." His voice was raw. He reached into the wreckage, his hands gentle now. He scooped up the small, trembling body. The puppy was impossibly light. It cried out again as he lifted it, a jolt of pain seizing its frame. Its leg was hanging at a terribly wrong angle. It was covered in blood. It was from Marcus's own hands, not the dog's. He pulled the puppy to his chest, cradling it against his flannel shirt. It was trembling violently, but it didn't try to bite him. It just whimpered and pushed its head into the fabric of his shirt, hiding from the world. The decision was no longer a decision. It was a fact. "I got you," Marcus whispered, the words feeling heavy and real. "I got you." He ran back to his truck, threw the mangled crate into the bed, and gently placed the puppy on the passenger seat. It curled into a tight, pained ball. He jumped into the driver's seat, cranked the engine, and peeled out onto the highway, sending a plume of gravel into the air where the black truck had been. He didn't drive toward his empty house. He drove toward the city. He drove toward the first veterinary clinic sign he could find. Marcus drove close. He didn't just drive, he flew. The old truck, which usually topped out at 65, was shuddering as the needle pushed past 80. He was on a new mission. The desert was a blur of tan and green outside his windows. His focus was reduced to a single point, the small, trembling creature whimpering on the passenger seat. He had one hand on the wheel, the other hovering over the puppy, a useless gesture of protection. The blood from his torn palms was smeared on the steering wheel, on the gear stick, on his jeans. He didn't feel the stinging. He was running on pure, undiluted adrenaline, a fuel he hadn't tasted in years. It felt clean. It felt right. He broke speed limits. He ran red lights. He was Sergeant Rourke, and he was a medevac. He finally saw a sign lit in blue and white. Puma Pet Emergency. He wrenched the wheel, the tires screaming as he swung into the parking lot, and slammed the truck into a parking space labeled as staff. He didn't turn the engine off. He bolted from the cab, gently scooping the puppy into his arms, and shouldered his way through the glass. The transition was a physical shock. He went from the 105-degree roaring, dusty hell of the desert into a room that was silent, sterile, and freezing. The air conditioning was Arctic. The silence was broken only by the low hum of a vending machine and the faint nervous tapping of a keyboard. The room smelled of bleach, antiseptic, and a faint underlying metallic tang of fear. It was too bright. The fluorescent lights were merciless, illuminating every speck of dust on his flannel shirt, every drop of sweat, every smear of blood. Behind a high, imposing counter sat a woman. She was in her late 40s with tightly permed blonde hair that looked brittle to the touch. Her face was sharp, her lips pursed, and her eyes, magnified by wire-rimmed glasses, were fixed on her computer screen. Her name tag read, Diane, office manager. She looked up as he stumbled in, and her expression, which had been one of bored irritation, heightened instantly into one of profound disapproval. She took in his appearance in a single sweeping glance, the wild matted beard, the bloodied hands, the filthy torn shirt, and the small, dying animal clutched to his chest. "Sir, we're closing in 5 minutes," Diane said, her voice high and nasal. She didn't ask what was wrong. She stated a fact. "You were diverting all overnight emergencies to the downtown hospital." Marcus just stood there, his mind still moving at 90 miles an hour. He was trying to process the cold, the quiet. The puppy let out a small, pained cry. "It's hurt," Marcus said, his voice a low rasp. "It was hit by a truck." The Diane sighed, a sound of infinite bureaucratic weariness. She looked at the puppy with disgust. "That animal is filthy, sir. Is it yours?" Before he could answer, she continued, her voice hardening. "Emergency stabilization for a non-client requires a deposit of $500, due up front. We accept cash or credit." 500. The words hit Marcus harder than the truck had hit the crate. It was the same tone his brother Mark had used. "It's a burden." It was the sound of the world telling him he was not welcome. This clean, cold place was not for people like him. People who were covered in the grime of the outside world. People who didn't have $500 for a problem that wasn't even theirs. He felt the familiar crushing weight of judgment. He was an outsider. A vagrant. A liability. His instinct, honed by years of rejection, screamed at him to retreat, turn around, walk out the door, get back to his truck, back to his empty house, where nothing was expected of him, where he couldn't fail. He visibly flinched, taking a half step back toward the door. He was going to leave. He was going to walk out, but then the puppy in his arms moved. It was a tiny, convulsive shiver, a final protest against the pain. It whimpered again, a high, needle-thin sound that pierced the sterile silence. That sound, it broke the spell. It was the sound of the objective. Marcus looked past Diane. He saw a set of double doors under a sign that read, "A staff only." That was where help was. Diane saw the shift in his eyes. "Yes, sir." She started, half rising from her chair. "You cannot." He moved. He bypassed the counter entirely, striding straight for the doors. "Sir." Diane shrieked, fumbling for the phone. "I'm calling security." Marcus ignored her. He was a Marine. He was trained to take the objective. He put his bloody hand on the door, but before he could push it, it swung open. A man stepped out. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a thick head of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from olive wood. He was Greek, or Italian, or something from the old world. He wore green scrubs spattered with dark, dried stains. His dark eyes were not sharp. They were deep, and they held an exhaustion that made Marcus's own fatigue look childish. His name tag, pinned to his chest, read, "A Dr. Vargas." Dr. Vargas looked at the scene, the hysterical receptionist, the wild-eyed man covered in blood, and his gaze immediately, instantly, fell past Marcus. He looked only at the puppy. He didn't recoil. He didn't judge. He simply assessed. "What happened?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, low, and calm. It was the calm of a man who had stood in the center of a hurricane. Marcus was so stunned by the lack of judgment that he stammered. "Highway. It was in a crate. A truck hit it. Hit the crate." Dr. Vargas was already moving. He didn't ask for permission. He stepped forward and, with a gentleness that was shocking, lifted the small, limp body from Marcus's arms. The puppy didn't even have the strength to whimper. "Brenda," he said, his voice never rising. "A clear exam room, too. I need receipt. Fluids, warm, and a heat lamp now." He started walking back through the doors, then paused. He looked down at the puppy's hind leg, which was hanging limply. Severe heat stroke. "It's in shock," he muttered to himself, his thumb gently checking the puppy's gums. "And this leg is broken. A fresh high-impact fracture from the crash, just like you said." He looked at Marcus for the first time. He didn't see a vagrant. He didn't see a burden. He saw the bloody hands. "Go sit down," he said. He said not unkindly. "You're bleeding all over the floor." Then he disappeared through the swinging doors, leaving Marcus alone in the bright, cold lobby. The adrenaline drained out of him all at once, leaving him weak-kneed and trembling. He slumped into one of the hard plastic chairs. Diane was staring at him, her mouth open. The phone, still in her hand. Marcus didn't see her. He stared at the closed doors. His desperate, furious plea, "Save it," had been understood. Marcus sat. The hard plastic chair was a small, cold island in the bright, silent ocean of the lobby. The adrenaline had evaporated, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching tremor. His hands, he looked down at them, truly seeing them for the first time. They were raw, caked with drying blood and black grease from the crate. They stung, a low, dull throb that pulsed in time with his heart. He felt Diane's eyes on him, a heavy, judgmental weight. She was standing by the counter, arms crossed, the phone still in her hand, watching him as if he were a feral animal that might suddenly lunge. He was, he supposed, an interruption, a mess, a problem. He was a burden, the word echoed in his skull. He should leave. He had handed off the objective. His mission was over. He should go back to his truck, back to his empty house, and wash the blood off. But his legs felt like they were bolted to the floor. He just stared at the double doors Dr. Vargas had disappeared through, as if he could see through the wood. Minutes stretched into an hour. The clinic officially closed. The lights in the lobby dimmed slightly, and the tapping of Diane's keyboard stopped. She grabbed her purse, her mouth set in a thin, angry line. She walked over to him holding a clipboard. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice sharp. "A doctor." "Vargas is stabilizing the animal, but we still require this paperwork and the deposit." She held out the clipboard and a pen. Marcus looked at the form. It was blue. It had boxes for owner's name, address, pet's name. He had none of those things. He started not knowing how to ask. "It's not mine." Diane's eyes narrowed. "Then you're relinquishing it to the clinic." "Fine. We still need payment for the emergency services rendered." She tapped the box at the bottom. "Minimum deposit, $500. Marcus stared at the number. He had $63 in his wallet and maybe $200 in a bank account he never touched. It was the same feeling as in his brother's dining room. The world was transactional, and he was bankrupt. I don't have it, he said this, the words thick with shame. I don't have that money. Diane's expression, which he thought couldn't get colder, did. Of course not, she sniffed. And then you need to leave. We will handle the animal. Handle it. The word was so cold, so final. He was failing again. He was about to stand up to surrender when the double door swung open. Dr. Vargas stood there, his mask down around his neck, his face etched with a fatigue so deep it looked like pain. He looked at Diane, then at Marcus, still holding the clipboard. Diane, he said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Go home, she sputtered. But doctor, the deposit, the policy, is that he's still here and I'm still working? The policy can wait. Go home. Diane snapped her mouth shut, her face flushing red. She snatched the clipboard from Marcus's hand and stormed out of the clinic, the glass door slamming behind her. The silence that fell was profound. She's not wrong, Marcus said, his voice low. Dr. Vargas just waved a dismissive hand. We have an emergency fund for strays. It'll cover it. Don't worry about Brenda. She's seen too many people lie. He rubbed his eyes. The puppy. He's stable, barely. He was in deep shock, severe dehydration, and the leg is a clean break of the femur. We're running fluids, giving him pain medication. He's not giving up. He looked at Marcus at his bloody hands. You should go get yourself cleaned up. There's nothing to do here but wait. Marcus shook his head. I'll wait. If it's all the same to you. Dr. Vargas studied him for a long moment, a flicker of understanding in his dark eyes. It's a free country. The chairs are hard. He disappeared back through the doors. Marcus stayed. As the clinic staff finished their shifts and left one by one, the lights went out, leaving only a single dim security light humming over the desk. He sat in the dark. It was familiar. It was like fire watch. It was a vigil. He just had to stay awake and guard the perimeter. He must have dozed because he was jolted awake by the sound of the front door opening. Sunlight, bright and sharp, was streaming into the lobby. A young woman with bright purple hair and a nose ring was walking in, holding a coffee. She saw him, startled, and then gave a small, nervous wave. This was a new person. She was probably in her early 20s, wearing bright blue scrubs with cartoon cats on them. She looked like the opposite of Diane. Her name tag said, a Chloe vet. She hurried to the back. A few minutes later, Dr. Vargas emerged, looking like he hadn't slept at all. He saw Marcus in the same chair and just nodded, a small flicker of surprise. Morning, Sergeant, he said. Marcus blinked. Your hands, Dr. Vargas said, pointing. And Marines always wrap their blisters, even when they're bleeding. Saw it 1,000 times in Vietnam, he sighed. He's still with us. He's a fighter. He made it through the night. Marcus stood up, his legs stiff. What do I owe you, Doc? Dr. Vargas was about to speak when Marcus cut him off. No, I don't mean the fund. I can't pay, but I can work. He held up his torn hands. I'm strong. I can clean, mop floors, haul the 50-pound bags of food. I'll do whatever you need. Just let me work it off. Dr. Vargas looked at Marcus, and his gaze was different now. It wasn't just assessment. It was recognition. He saw a man who was drowning and needed a rope. He needed a mission. You're serious? Dr. Vargas said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. Chloe, he called. The young tech peeked her head out. Yes, Dr. Vargas? To show Sergeant Rourke where the mops and the big trash bins are. He's our new volunteer. The work was a brutal, beautiful relief. Chloe, the vet tech, showed him the supply closet, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The kennels in the back get pretty messy, she said softly, and the big bags of dog food, they're really heavy. Marcus just nodded. Understood. He grabbed the mop and a bucket and he started. For the next 8 hours he worked. He lost himself in the simple, repetitive physical labor. He mopped floors, the scent of bleach cutting through his memory of the desert. He disinfected empty kennels, scrubbing them with a ferocity that made Chloe's eyes go wider. He hauled 40-pound bags of prescription dog food from the loading bay to the storage room, stacking them in perfect neat rows. He took out the trash. He cleaned the staff bathroom. He washed out food bowls. The order, the routine, the simplicity of a mission with a clear objective, it was like a balm on his raw nerves. The chaotic noise in his head, the static of his PTSD, began to quiet down. It was just the thud of the bags, the slush of the water. At the end of the day, he was sore, exhausted, and smelled like chemicals. Dr. Vargas found him stacking the last of the food bags. "That's enough for one day, Sergeant," he said. Marcus just nodded, his shirt soaked with sweat. "Can I?" He started, not knowing how to ask. I see him." Dr. Vargas nodded. 5 minutes. He needs to rest." He led Marcus into the back, past the barking dogs and meowing cats, into a small, quiet room. It was the ICU. In a small temperature-controlled kennel, under a heat lamp, was the puppy. He was clean. His fur, where it wasn't shaved for the fore, was a soft, deep black and tan. His back leg was in a bright blue cast held in a sling. He was asleep, a V-line running into his tiny foreleg. He looked impossibly small and fragile. Marcus stood there, his large, scarred hands feeling useless. He pulled up a stool. He just sat watching the puppy's chest rise and fall. He was supposed to talk to people. The therapist always said that. He never could. But the silence in the room was heavy. "So," Marcus whispered, his voice rough, "you're a lot of trouble. You know that, right?" "What?" The puppy's ear twitched. Marcus felt a strange pressure in his chest. "You're a fighter. I'll give you that." He paused. "I was in the desert too. A different one. We lost a man. Corporal James, he was 19. He had never said this. Not to anyone. My fault, I changed the patrol route." He stared at the blue cast. "We all got hit, but I walked away. They didn't." He reached out a finger, stopping just short of touching the kennel. I've been waiting. Just waiting, I guess, for it to make sense." He looked at the pup. "And then I see you, just waiting on the side of the road." He let out a shaky breath. "And you held me there on that road. You wouldn't let me leave. You kept me there. You anchored me." He nodded to himself, the word feeling right. "Anchor, that's your name." Puppy's eyes slowly opened. They weren't glazed with heat or wild with fear. They were clear. It looked at Marcus. It tilted its head just a fraction. It wasn't afraid. It was just watching, curious. Weeks bled into a month, then 6 weeks. The raw, desperate urgency of the first day had settled into the steady, monotonous rhythm of a life. Marcus was no longer the wild-eyed man who had stumbled in, covered in blood. The clinic had, in its own way, restored his uniform. He had shaved his wild beard down to a neat, short-cropped layer of salt and pepper. His flannel shirts were gone, replaced by simple, clean black t-shirts and jeans. He was a fixture. He arrived before Chloe, the purple-haired tech, and he was often the last to leave with Dr. Vargas. His mission was simple. He was the clinic's muscle and its janitor. He was the one who hauled the 50-pound bags of prescription kibble, who mopped the floors until they gleamed, who scrubbed the surgical suite with a focus that was almost terrifying. The staff had slowly, cautiously absorbed him into their ecosystem. He was still Rourke, a man who said maybe 10 words a day. But he was their Rourke, who had initially eyed him like he was a live grenade, now treated him with a cheerful, one-sided familiarity. He'd leave a cup of black coffee on the counter for him in the mornings. It's the morning. "We've got a busy one. A Rottweiler ate a corn cob. It's graphic." Marcus would just grunt, nod his thanks, and drink the coffee. He still kept his distance, but the distance was no longer charged with anger. It was just his perimeter. His relationship with Dr. Vargas was different. It was forged in silence. They were two veterans of different dirty wars, and they recognized the fatigue in each other's eyes. Sometimes they would stand over a difficult case, a dog that wouldn't make it. And Dr. Vargas would just sigh, "You can't save them all, Sergeant." And Marcus would nod. "No, sir. You just saved the one in front of you." The respect between them was absolute. Even Diane, the sharp-faced office manager, had been worn down. She no longer looked at him with disdain, but with a kind of grudging acceptance. He was, if nothing else, relentlessly punctual, and he did the work of two people. He was no longer a burden. He was a functioning, useful tool. And for Marcus, this was a quiet salvation. The work was simple. It was physical. It was real. It wasn't about navigating the minefield of his family's disappointment. It was about cleaning a kennel, lifting a bag, holding a nervous dog still for an injection. The ritual of it, the order, was the first true peace he had felt in years. He started sleeping. It wasn't the deep, dreamless sleep of the innocent, but it was sleep. The nightmares of Corporal James and the convoy were still there, but they were quieter, muted. Sometimes in the dreams, Anchor would be there, sitting silently in the desert dust, just watching him. And he would wake up, not in a cold sweat, but just awake. Anchor himself was transforming. The tiny, broken creature was gone. In his place was a lanky, awkward 5-month-old German shepherd, a creature composed almost entirely of giant paws, radar dish ears, and a healing leg. The bright blue cast had come off the week before. The fur on his leg was patchy and strange, the limb itself weak and stiff. He was learning to walk on it again, a process that involved a lot of stumbling, cautious steps, and frustration. Dr. Vargas had prescribed physical therapy, which mostly consisted of Marcus sitting on the floor with the puppy, carefully and gently flexing the recovering joints. This was the only contact Marcus allowed himself, a clinical, prescribed touch. He never petted the dog. He never used a baby voice. He was firm, gentle, and distant. "Okay, Anchor," he'd murmur, moving the leg. "5 more. Don't be a baby." Anchor would whine, but he would let Marcus do it. The pup's defensive snarl from the roadside was long gone, replaced by the same watchful, curious gaze from the ICU. But the bond was clear to everyone else. It was an unspoken, powerful thing. The staff, especially Chloe, had noticed it. Anchor was still deeply wary of people. He would tolerate Dr. Vargas and would shrink away from Chloe's friendly advances. But his entire world revolved around Marcus. Chloe learned this the hard way. "I don't get it," she complained one afternoon, kneeling by Anchor's large recovery pen. She had been trying to get him to eat his lunch for 20 minutes. The puppy was huddled in the back corner watching her. "He won't eat for me. Dr. Vargas. He's just snubbing me." Marcus walked into the room carrying a bucket. Anchor's head snapped up. His tail, which had been tucked, gave a single tentative thump. He got up, wincing on his bad leg, and limped over to the side of the pen, his eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus stopped. "Marcus," Chloe sighed, exasperated. "I see. He's yours, Rourke. Just feed him." She pushed the bowl toward Marcus and stormed off. Marcus looked at the dog. Anchor looked back, expectant. Marcus took the bowl and placed it inside the pen. Anchor immediately, greedily began to eat. "We're a pain in the ass," Marcus muttered. Anchor's tail thumped again. It was late. The last appointment had gone home. Chloe had left, her purple hair bouncing as she ran to her car. Dr. Vargas was in his office, finishing paperwork. Marcus was doing his final rounds, mopping the floor of the recovery room. The clinic was quiet, the only sound the slush and squeak of his mop. He finished placing the bucket in the janitor's closet. He was tired, a good tired, the kind that came from hard work, not from a fractured mind. He grabbed his keys from the break room. He was heading for the door when he paused. He turned and walked back to Anchor's pen. The puppy was lying down, but was not asleep. His head was up, his ears forward, watching the doorway, waiting. That familiar ache returned to Marcus's chest. "Good night, Anchor," he said, his voice a low rumble. He knelt by the pen. He didn't unlatch the door. He didn't offer his hand to be petted. He just looked at the dog. He was about to stand up and leave, but Anchor stood too. He limped over to the wire, his movement still awkward. He pushed his wet black nose through one of the squares in the fence. He wasn't growling. He wasn't scared. He was initiating. Marcus stared at the black nose. He remembered the terrified, defiant creature in the crate, the one who was ready to fight to the death. This was not that dog. Slowly, Marcus uncurled his fist. He raised his hand, palm up, and held it steady against the wire. He expected the dog to pull back. He expected the fear. Anchor sniffed his fingers. He sniffed the calluses, the faint smell of bleach, the old faded scent of blood from weeks ago. And then he did it. A small pink tongue darted out and gave Marcus his knuckles a single hesitant wet lick. Marcus Rourke froze. His breath caught in his chest. He did not move for 10 seconds. A single simple gesture had breached his walls. It was trust. It was the first unearned, unconditional act of trust he had felt in years. His hand was trembling. Very slowly, he unlatched the pen door and swung it open. Anchor didn't move. Marcus reached his hand in, no longer clinical, no longer a sergeant. He placed his scarred hand on top of the puppy's head, right between the giant soft ears. Anchor didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He let out a low, shaky groan and leaned his entire body weight into the touch, closing his eyes. Marcus's throat tightened so hard he thought he might choke. He just knelt there, his hand moving, scratching the soft fur, feeling the warmth of the animal. He felt a sudden, sharp sting in his eye. A single hot tear broke free from his defenses and slid uninvited down his cheek, disappearing into the rough stubble of his beard. He didn't wipe it away. He just kept petting the dog. The weeks following the first touch were a quiet revelation. The wall between Marcus and the world, breached by a single wet lick, didn't just crumble. It was systematically dismantled, paw by paw. The good tiredness Marcus felt from his work was now joined by a deeper, more resonant sense of purpose. His mission was no longer just the clinic. It was Anchor. His days took on a new shape. The physical therapy for Anchor's leg, once a clinical task, became playtime. Marcus, the man who hadn't smiled in years, was now sitting on the clinic floor, growling playfully as he wrestled a rope toy from the puppy's jaws. Anchor, now nearly 6 months old, was a force of nature. His healed leg was strong, and he used it to chase Marcus around the clinic's small fenced-in yard, barking with a deep, joyous sound that echoed off the building. Chloe, the purple-haired tech, would watch them through the window, her jaw slack. "I don't believe it," she whispered to Dr. Vargas one afternoon. "He's laughing. Rourke is laughing." Dr. Vargas just watched, a rare soft smile touching his lips. "It's good medicine, Chloe, for both of them." Marcus was beginning to feel human again. The static in his head was almost gone when he went back to his small, empty rental house at night. It no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a barracks, a temporary place to rest before the next day's mission. He was saving money. He had a cot in the corner for himself, but he'd bought a large, soft dog bed and placed it next to it. Ready for the day, Dr. Vargas finally said Anchor could leave. Everything was, for the first time since the convoy, good. And that, Marcus knew, was when the world always struck. It started subtly. One afternoon, Anchor didn't want the rope toy. He just lay by the pen, his head on his paws. "Tired boy?" Marcus murmured, scratching his ears. He chalked it up to the heat. But that evening, Anchor refused his food, the food he usually devoured. He just looked at the bowl, then back at Marcus, his eyes dull. A cold knot of dread formed in Marcus's stomach. This was not tiredness. This was wrong. He found Dr. Vargas in his office. "Doc," he said, his voice tight, "it's Anchor. He's not right. He won't eat." The Dr. Vargas was on his feet instantly. The clinic's atmosphere shifted from quiet routine to sharp, focused emergency in seconds. Dr. Vargas took Anchor's temperature. He drew blood. He cursed under his breath. "His fever is 105, he said, his face grim. "It's a secondary infection. Aggressive. His immune system was compromised from the highway. It was too weak to fight off something new. They put Anchor on a heavy 4-drip of antibiotics, but the puppy just lay on the steel table, limp, his breathing shallow. He was the same color as the first day, his gums pale. "Go home, Rourke," Dr. Vargas said, his voice gentle but firm. "There's nothing you can do here. This is the medicine's fight now. Go." Marcus refused. He spent 2 hours just standing in the corner of the treatment room, watching, a useless silent sentinel. Finally, around 11 p.m., Dr. Vargas put a hand on his shoulder. "Go. He's stable. He needs to sleep. I'll call you if anything changes." I promise. Marcus finally reluctantly agreed. He drove home, the silence in his truck roaring in his ears. He sat in his house in the dark, staring at the empty dog bed. He didn't sleep. He waited. The phone rang at 1:30 a.m. Marcus grabbed it before the first ring finished, his heart a cold, hard fist in his chest. Urk. Now Dr. Vargas's voice was tight, stripped of all calm. You need to come now. He's crashing. The antibiotics aren't working. He's in septic shock. I don't think he's going to make it. Marcus didn't say goodbye. He was in his truck in seconds, his keys tearing a gash in his palm as he jammed them into the ignition. The drive was a blur of terror. This was not the adrenaline-fueled medevac of the first day. This was a panic he had never known. It was raw, personal, and devastating. He realized as he tore through the empty Tucson streets that his fear for himself was gone. He was no longer afraid of the nightmares. He was no longer afraid of his family's judgment. He was afraid of this. He was afraid of the world. After this, he was afraid of the silence that would follow. He had been a dead man walking for years, a ghost haunting his own life. And this small, broken dog had, in 6 weeks, become the one single thing that anchored him to the living. If Anchor let go, he would let go too. He would drift away, and this time he wouldn't come back. He burst through the clinic doors, which Dr. Vargas had left unlocked for him. The lobby was dark, but the treatment room was a blaze of harsh, sterile light. Chloe was there, backed against the wall, her hands over her mouth, her eyes streaming with tears. Dr. Vargas was working furiously over Anchor, who was stretched out on the steel table. He was motionless, utterly, terrifyingly still. And he was in one leg. A heat lamp was pointed at his body, and a monitor beside him was beeping a low, slow, failing rhythm. I'm losing him, Rourke, Dr. Vargas said, his voice ragged. His fever hit 106. His body is shutting down. Marcus walked toward the table, his boots heavy as lead. Anchor looked so small. He was back to being the broken thing in the crate. No, Marcus whispered. He didn't ask for permission. He reached out and put his scarred hand flat on the puppy's rib cage. He could feel the terrible burning heat of the fever and the shallow, thready pulse beneath. No, he said again, louder. He wasn't talking to the doctor. He was talking to the dog. He was talking to God. He leaned in close, his head bowed. Don't you do it, Anchor, he whispered, his voice a low, desperate growl. You hear me? You don't have my permission. You fought the heat. You fought the truck. You fight this. His voice cracked, a raw, jagged sound. You don't get to leave. You don't get to leave me. You hear me, Sergeant? I need you. He didn't move. He stood there, his hand on Anchor's chest as if he could pour his own life force, his own stubborn refusal to die, into the dog's failing. Dr. Vargas continued to work, injecting new fluids, checking the monitor, but his face was a mask of grim defeat. An hour passed, then 2. The only sounds were the low beep of the monitor and Marcus's harsh breathing. Chloe had long since gone home, sobbing. Finally, Dr. Vargas stepped back, his shoulders slumped. There's nothing more I can do, son, he said, his voice thick. It's up to him now. Marcus didn't even look up. He didn't take his hand off the dog. I'm not leaving. Dr. Vargas nodded, understood, and collapsed into a chair in the corner, his eyes never leaving the table. The vigil began. Marcus stood there as 3 Kirk-IM became 4 AM. The sky outside was still black. He could feel the heartbeat under his palm. It was so weak. Thump. 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 He prayed. Who hadn't spoken to God in a decade prayed. Don't take him. Take me. Just don't take him. 5:00 AM. The first hint of bruised purple light touched the window. Marcus was so tired his vision was blurring. He was about to collapse, and then, under his hand, he felt it. Anchor shuddered, a full-body violent tremor. He let out a low moan whine. Dr. Vargas was on his feet in a second. What? Marcus couldn't speak. He just pointed. Anchor's ear twitched. He sighed. A long, deep, rattling breath. Dr. Vargas grabbed the thermometer. He checked the monitor. He checked the monitor. He checked the dog's gums. He was silent for a full minute, his face a mask of concentration. Get me a cold towel, he ordered. Marcus moved, his legs clumsy, and did as he was told. The doctor wiped Anchor's face. He took the temperature again. He stared at the digital reading. 103. 5, he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. It was 106. The fever broke. Marcus's knees buckled. He grabbed the table to keep from falling. He looked at Anchor. The puppy's eyes, which had been closed, flickered open. They were no longer dull. They were exhausted, but they were clear. He saw Marcus, and his tail gave a single weak thump on the steel table. Marcus let out a sound he didn't know he was capable of, a ragged sob that was half a laugh, and he slumped into the stool, burying his face in his hands. He was alive. He was still here. The recovery the second time was different. It was not the desperate, fragile recovery from the highway. It was a recovery born from a shared victory. Marcus didn't leave the clinic for 2 days. He slept on the hard floor of the treatment room next to Anchor's kennel, refusing the cot Dr. Vargas offered him. He watched as the fever, truly broken, receded, and his strength, true strength, began to flood back into the puppy. Anchor's appetite returned with a vengeance, and his personality, which had been bright, now seemed incandescent. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a victim. Within a week, he was a 7-month-old, 60-pound hurricane of black and tan fur, healed leg and all. The clinic, which had been his hospital, became his playground. He was a creature of pure, unadulterated joy, a stark contrast to the silent, watchful man who was his shadow. Marcus, too, was different. The terror of that night, the fear of losing the one thing he had allowed himself to care about, had burned away the last of his apathy. He was no longer a ghost. He was present. He was the man who threw the rope, the man who jogged and limped alongside the dog in the small yard, the man who, for the first time, was looking people in the eye when they spoke to him. One early afternoon, Dr. Vargas found Marcus in the storage room, neatly stacking bags of food. "Rourke," the doctor said, his voice quiet. Marcus turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The doc." Dr. Vargas held his gaze, his face serious. "We need to talk about Anchor." Marcus's heart gave a single hard thump. He assumed it was medical. "Is he okay? Did the blood work come back?" "He's perfect," Dr. Vargas said, rubbing his tired eyes. "His blood work is clean. He's fully recovered. He's done. He's ready." Marcus didn't understand. Ready for what? Dr. Vargas leaned against the doorframe. "Rourke, he's not your dog. Legally, he's a stray, who was relinquished to this clinic. You've been his foster, his volunteer, but he's ready for a home, a permanent one." Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. The cold, sterile air of the clinic suddenly felt just like the freezing lobby on that first day. He was an outsider. Again. A vagrant, unfit. "He bought a dog bed for my place," Marcus said. Dr. Vargas nodded, his expression full of a pain Marcus recognized. The pain of a man who has to make a hard, logical decision. "Rourke, your place is a cot in a one-room rental. This dog, this breed needs a yard. He needs stability. He needs a family." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. A professor, a yard, a son. He thought of his tiny rental, the cracked plaster, the yard of dead weeds. He thought of his nightmares, his inability to be around normal people. He was a broken soldier living on disability checks. His brother Mark was right. Dr. Vargas was right. He had no right to hold this bright, joyous creature back. He had saved Anchor's life, and now his final mission was to give him one. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice a rough whisper. "Hey, yard, kid. That's good." "That's right." He couldn't look the doctor in the eye. He just nodded, his throat thick. "Okay." The Wilsons arrived at 4. Marcus watched from the shadows of the hallway by the janitor's closet. He was a ghost again, mopping a floor that was already clean. They were exactly as Dr. Vargas had described. Tom Wilson was a man in his mid-40s with a kind, open face, a soft blue sweater, and the clean, unscuffed shoes of an academic. He had the easy smile of a man who had never seen the world fall apart. His wife, Mary, was tall and slender, with a warm, anxious energy. She held a brand new, bright red leash in her hand. And their son Liam was a polite, bright-eyed 10-year-old, practically vibrating with an excitement he was trying and failing to contain. They were the picture of normality. They were the opposite of the highway. They were safe. Marcus felt a pain so sharp he had to lean against the wall. He was doing the right thing. This was the sacrifice. Chloe, her eyes red, brought Anchor out from the back. "This is him," she said, her voice watery. Anchor, seeing new people, was ecstatic. He bounded into the lobby, his tail a blur, his paws clicking on the tile. Liam gasped. "He's amazing." Anchor ran right to the boy, sniffing and licking his face, accepting the shower of affection. Tom knelt, rubbing Anchor's ears, his voice calm and steady. "Well, hello there, fella. You're a handsome boy, aren't you?" Anchor played. He chased the ball Liam had brought. He sat politely when Mary offered him a treat. He was a perfect dog. Marcus's heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. "He seems to have a wonderful temperament," Mary said, looking at Dr. Vargas with a grateful smile. "He's perfect, File. He's perfect." "He is," Dr. Vargas said, though he was looking at Marcus, who was still hiding in the shadows. "Well," Tom said, rubbing his hands together, "I think we're in agreement." "Mary, you have the leash right here," she said. She knelt and clipped the new bright red leash onto Anchor's collar. "We're ready to go home, boy." Anchor, hearing the click, suddenly went still. He looked at the leash. He looked at the family. He looked at the front door. And then he looked past them, down the hall, to where Marcus stood frozen. Anchor whined, a low sound in his chest. "It's okay, boy," Tom said, gently tugging the leash. "Let's go. Time to go home." Anchor took one step, then another. He reached the glass door, and then he stopped. He planted his feet. He was a 60-pound rock. "Come on, boy," Liam encouraged, pulling. Anchor pulled back. He pulled so hard the leash was ripped from Mary's hand. He didn't run around. He didn't panic. He turned, his nails scraping the tile, and he ran. He ran past the Wilsons, past Dr. Vargas, past Chloe. He ran straight down the hallway to the janitor's closet, to the man who smelled like bleach and sweat. He pushed his head into Marcus's legs, nearly knocking him over. Then he sat directly on Marcus's dusty boots. He looked up, his tongue lolling, his tail thumping against the mop bucket, and he barked once, a single, sharp, decisive sound. The lobby was silent. The Wilsons stared, their faces a mask of confusion. Chloe had her hands over her mouth. But this time she was smiling. Marcus was immobile. His heart stopped, his breathing gone. He looked down at the dog who had chosen him. The broken man, the tiny rental, the nightmares, the poverty. The dog didn't care. He was home. Dr. Vargas walked over, the sound of his shoes loud in the silence. He stood next to Marcus. He put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Rourke," he said, and his gravelly voice was thick with emotion. "I think he's chosen." Marcus looked at Tom and Mary. He looked at Dr. Vargas, and then he looked down at Anchor, the tight, painful knot he had carried in his chest since he left San Diego. It just dissolved. His face, which had been a mask of stone for years, cracked. A slow, unfamiliar, real smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes, which were suddenly bright. He knelt, his knees hitting the tile hard. He didn't say a word. He just buried his face in Anchor's thick, rough fur, his shoulders shaking. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice muffled in fur. He did. He stood up slowly. He looked at Dr. Vargas. Dr. Vargas. Doc," he said, his voice clear. "What's the paperwork for me?" Vargas beamed. "Brenda," he yelled. "He's got me the adoption forms, the real ones." Marcus took the cheap, worn rope leash he had in his back pocket. He clipped it onto Anchor's collar. He looked at the Wilsons, who, though sad, were smiling. "We understand," Tom said, nodding. "Take good care of him." "I will, sir," Marcus said. He tugged the leash. "Come on, Anchor." The dog barked, bounding ahead. "Let's go home." And they walked out the glass doors together into the bright, hot Arizona sun. The story of Marcus Rourke and Anchor is a powerful living testament that miracles are real. But they do not always come to us as thunderclaps from heaven. Sometimes a miracle comes to us as a whimper in the dust. It shows us that God does not always send us what we want. He sends us what we want. He sends us what we need. Marcus was a man who believed he was disqualified from love. He was a man convinced by his past, and even by his own family, that he was a burden. He was lost, and he had accepted being lost. Anchor was an animal left to die, a creature who had learned from the world that humans only meant pain. They were two broken souls on a lonely highway, and neither could have saved themselves, but God had a plan. He sent them to each other. In our own lives, how often do we feel like Marcus? We feel unseen. We feel unqualified. We look at our past mistakes, our broken homes, or our own deep sadness, and we think we are not worthy of a miracle. We pray for God to fix our lives. But sometimes, God sends us a mission instead. He sends us something small and broken that needs our help. The true miracle wasn't just finding the dog. The miracle was in the choice. Marcus, a man who believed he could save nothing, chose to turn the truck around. He chose to fight for Anchor's life in that clinic. He chose to care, even when it hurt. And in that final, beautiful moment, Anchor chose him. That is what God's grace looks like in our daily lives. It doesn't look at your bank account. It doesn't look at your perfect family or your clean record. It looks at your heart. Anchor didn't see a broken veteran in a tiny rental. He saw the man who stayed. He saw the man who stayed him. He saw home. If you believe that God can send a miracle into your life, big or small, if you believe in the healing power of an animal's unconditional love, please show your faith by writing Amen in the comments below. Let us know this story touched your heart. Please share this story with anyone you know who might be feeling lost, anyone who needs a reminder that they are not a burden, and that their own miracle may be just around the corner. And please subscribe to our channel for more stories that warm the heart and restore the soul. We pray that God blesses every single person watching this. May He watch over you, your families, and your own faithful companions. May He send you an anchor when you need one most. Thank you for watching.